And so what are some of the conversations or shifts that need to happen to create more of an alignment between C-suite and the whole part of the company? And what would bridge that disconnect, right? Do we need to build our teams differently here?
It's one of those chicken or egg situations. Do we redesign the supply chain and then find somebody to lead it? Or do we find a leader who can then redesign the supply chain? When I'm talking to different retailers, I say, well, tell me how you handle that. And we find that the supply chain is, firstly, it's highly siloed, very fragmented. What I would call as a supply chain may actually be in merchandising, maybe bit of stores. You find parts of the actual overall horizontal flow tucked away. Yeah. And I think that's just a matter of history. And it needs a pretty strong leader to actually go to the head of merchandising, the head of stores, and say, look, these are logistical functions and they form part of the supply chain, and we need to manage these in a different way. So what I would say, and I've been saying for quite a few years now, is each business, and it's not isolated just to retail, but retail could really get on the front foot here by saying we will appoint a chief supply chain officer. It's a term that's still quite uncommon in Canada. It's not the EVP or the SVP, whatever. They may or may not be the real person that should be sitting at the C-suite, advising the board, advising their colleagues, challenging their colleagues on some of the great schemes they have for developing sales. But they need to have a chief supply chain officer who's managing that end-to-end horizontal process that brings the stuff in, looks after the manufacturer and the previous steps to that, and presents it to the consumer. Because if we don't have stock on the shelf, we don't make the sale. Welcome, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Gary Newbury. I'm a senior executive on call, helping businesses in the make, move, sell flow of consumer goods and services. My purpose is to inspire business leaders, particularly those within the consumer products and retailing space, to think big, be bold, scale, adapt and win, one epic supply chain transformation at a time. There's additional content available through my website, RetailAID.ca, or on my YouTube channel, RetailAID. Be sure to check it out. As the business world faces much volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, organizations need to be tapping into resources with an inside edge on transitioning their teams to be agile, innovative and digital, with thought leaders, experts and senior executives who have mastery of operational turnarounds and strategic transformations to help reorientate their enterprises. There's great material to get through here, so let's get started.
Welcome to Developing a Flexible First Approach Within Retail Supply Chains, featuring Gary Newbury, Retail Supply Chain Consultant, and Audrey Ross with Orchard Custom Beauty. They'll explore opportunities for retail supply chains and some key actionable takeaways for consumer-oriented businesses looking to win in a world of accelerating trends, expectations, and high external risks. Enjoy the session.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gary Newbury and I'm joined with Audrey Ross. We're here to talk about developing a flexible first approach within retail supply chains. I'm a senior exec on call specializing in rapid performance improvement within retail supply chains and the last mile. And for the purpose of this discussion, a retail supply chain includes manufacturing, third-party logistics, wholesaling, retailing, and the last mile, not just the four walls of a retailer. And we need to have that perspective as we think about the supply chain, because I think that that's possibly one of the reasons why when we think about supply chain, it's all about just a logistics, just a warehouse, and we don't get that wider perspective of what the supply chain is capable of doing and what it should be doing. We're going to talk today, it's going to be by fireside chat, and we're going to talk about a broad level about agility, resiliency, sustainability, and perhaps some glimmers into a future, because I don't think I'd be the only one who is honest in this, that we don't actually know what's going to happen to us next. So many things can still disrupt us. We're under a whole cloak of disruption under the heading of COVID-19, but there's been so many things that have, knocked us sideways, and I'll probably touch on those in a minute. So I'm going to hand over to Audrey.
Thanks so much, Gary. I'm really excited to be here and talk to the STORE conference attendees today. I've been lucky because we've been in preparation for this, getting caught up and chatting about a lot of these issues. And it's a very dynamic and adventurous time, I think. So my name is Audrey Ross. I am in Toronto. I am an in-house specialist at Orchard Custom Beauty. So I do the logistics, customs compliance, everything that Gary mentioned. It's not just that small little piece, it's sort of that whole value chain right up from the beginning to the end. Orchard is an award-winning business-to-business private labeling company that specializes in cosmetics and beauty. We work with large retailers and small boutique firms worldwide.
Excellent. I think there's a couple of things that we want to
share. Housekeeping. Yes. So if you are in, you can see that there is a question box. So you can drop your questions in there. On the day this is presented, we'll be in the chat to also view it along with you and answer your questions live at that point as well.
I'm going to kick off with where we are as a level set. Just so that we all know we're in the right session here. We're going to be talking about the supply chain almost exclusively here. We may agree the pandemic has brought into sharp focus the challenges with our end-to-end retail supply chain designs, and in particular, the under-responsiveness of geographically extended supply chains when unexpected circumstances occur, such as disruption to trade patterns, which in different ways we have been all experiencing within Canadian retailing. The trade wars between the US and China during 2017 to 19, and to a degree between the US and Canada, and a week of an expected 2019 trading year and peak, followed by the impacts of the pandemic, the lockdowns and restrictions. These factors have clearly revealed how delicately poised global trade patterns have become, and have been supported by supply chains with little to no tolerance for unexpected or significant volume and mix swings. Basically, as the impact of lockdown spread globally, these long, complex, and let's call it efficient supply chains showed very limited resiliency. If we then add in some of the events that we've experienced since the first lockdown, the weather effects like the Texas winter, the blockage of in the Suez Canal, the social distancing at key nodes such as factories, ports, rail hubs, and across surface transportation networks, the unhelpful dispositioning of containers during the first lockdown, how blank sailings, cancelled shippings, became rollovers very quickly, which reflected the relatively inflexible marine vessel capacities that we're all having to face up to. We've had cyber criminal activity on infrastructure, but it could quite easily happen to us as retailers, and a less than robust risk management approach. And this is probably the key factor here. And then we add into the mix, and I'm not going through a huge list, but we add into the mix the need for urgent PPE and medications. And then we discovered in our rush to lean down our cost per case, our overall cost parameters, the source of such production was, guess what? In the Far East, who were facing their own struggles with the early impacts of the pandemic. 18 months after the start of the pandemic, here in Canada, we continue to have shortages. We have sharply rising prices of commodities and transportation, capacity constraints on most elements of the supply network, delays in processing through ports, the risk of strategically impactful labour actions, such as maybe at the Port of Montreal or CBSA, and a vaccination programme saddled with continued hesitancy. It's clear from the last 2 to 3 to 4 years, there's been much turmoil which retail supply chains have not been able to tackle that well. The fault line was created many, many years ago with a focus on cost modelling to achieve efficiency in sourcing, efficiency on transportation, and efficiency on storage, all individual elements. The reaction to some of these adverse impacts of the pandemic and the associated disruptions, several retail businesses are exploring options to pull up stakes and bring production much closer to their domestic market. However, they face a realization the infrastructure, capacity, and skill base simply may not be there without significant investment or a time delay of many, many months. Facing performance challenges from traditional supply chain designs during a pandemic, most of which were designed in the 1990s. These designs, in today's disruptive times, I would argue, have created havoc, waste, shock, daily disruption, and importantly, a faltering of consumer confidence and lifetime value as we work through this period.
Oh, Gary, thank you. That painted such an illustrative picture of what challenging times we are in. And I expect many in our audience are affected by, if not all, of what you described, certainly the main effects. And I would say I'm certainly working harder on spending more money and facing more timing issues in my supply chain. You can see from what you've described that it's been a cumulative effect of decisions that have been made over time that maybe weren't done with the kind of thoughtfulness in mind that we need to be resilient today. So we've got a couple of questions that we're going to go through and discuss together. So let's start with agility and resilience. So these are words that are tossed around in our industry, and yet they seem to be blurred terms. So what do they mean to you, and what kind of actions do companies need to be able to achieve these values, to be able to have agility and find resilience?
Yeah, how they're currently used in sort of modern parlance, I think they're interchangeable. We chuck them around like confetti. Oh, we're resilient, we're agile, we're this, we're that, we're pivoting, whatever. But we are typically doing the same as we did like 2 or 3 years ago. We're just maybe doing more of it, and we'll perhaps touch on that later. But I think I'd like to sort of break this into the two things. What is resilient and what is being agile? So for me, being resilient is being able to take punches to the side and recover from that really quickly and stay focused on today's business. And if I could draw a 2x2 matrix of, on one side, products with current and new, and on this side, market segments or consumers, current and new, resiliency is about being in this box. And as I say, taking these punches, these disruptions, and still maintaining a good shape. One technical definition of resilience is saying that if we've got 6 weeks of stock of an item and the disruption we're facing is 4 weeks, well, we've got 2 weeks cover, so we're good, we're resilient. Well, that's assuming that the demand stays the same, and that's a very, very loose way of explaining the concept. But the other way around, just perhaps demonstrate it a bit clearer. If we have 4 weeks of stock and the disruption is 6 weeks, that would indicate that we're going to have a 2-week problem, but then we've probably got a backlog for our suppliers because they may also be equally, if not more, disrupted. So it may take quite some time to actually get back into a good stock position. Now, Agile is a completely different concept. So with resiliency, they may have things like disaster recovery plans, business continuity plans. It's all about keeping a business in good shape as it stands. Whereas agility is recognizing that we're in a disruptive environment and we need to look at different scenarios which could hit us, the risks of those, and then picking our way through that to see what capabilities, what capacities do we need to have so that when these things happen, we smoothly move from this state to that state. So in that 2x2 matrix, we may move from current business, current products and current markets to current products in new markets, or current markets taking, giving them new products and being able to move that relatively easily. I say it easily, but it's much more controlled than the massive firefight that I suspect many retailers have experienced and their partners in the ecosystem. So I think that we start with, in agility, we start with a mindset that thinks about scenario plan, thinks about all the different things that could happen, and then goes off and does something about those. It's not saying we have a mitigation plan if it happens. We actually go and secure better warehousing facilities, bigger ones, or better store layouts, or whatever it might be. And then the third stage of that is actually to work potentially with suppliers or however agility may relate to your business, but to digitize that whole process so that we can not only move physically, we can actually move virtually into this new state as well.
So many good points. I think we're not agile because we say we're agile. We're agile in the planning and the organizing and the setup that we've made, and building that mindset shift from just thinking that you can get something when you need it, and moving towards actually building those resources, capabilities, and capacities in advance. I think this of course has been such a challenging time, or difficult time, and for some of us, myself included, even expanding my vendor network. So I was working with, say, 4 freight forwarders, and now I'm working with almost 10. But a lot of that happened last minute. And luckily, most of them are relationships that I've been building over the last couple of years. But it's that diligence in thinking through these different scenarios and just having that readiness. And it's not like, oh yeah, sure, I have a plan. It's, no, we've got this settled.
Yeah, and I think the important point that you've expressed there is that it's not the mitigation action that we drag out from the filing cabinet. What do we need to do? What's our plan B? I don't know. It's actually practicing these things ongoing. So if we were in the Far East, and sometimes we switch to air from sea, we actually go through that process. Oh, it's a bit more expensive. We shouldn't do that. We should do that, because when we encounter the thing that's going to trigger us, we know what that looks like. We have those relationships in place. We know exactly what our processes need to look like. We've got them really refined down. And that's the thing that's missing. So we have these kind of 3 stages. We have reactive, which is typically the firefight. We have this responsive, where maybe we move up the operational capability scale. So we're kind of responding. We might even call that kind of pivoting. Then we have the proactive, which is the agile. We're actually getting on the front foot. We're trying to get ahead of the market, get ahead of our consumers, so we can actually continue to serve them very well during major disruption that we've experienced.
I love the way you break that down. It's like nice and simple. It's reactive, responsive, proactive. So that's 3 things. Anybody can do this.
Yeah. See, simple, isn't it?
So simple.
So one of the things that I want to just touch on briefly with you, Audrey, is sustainability. We talked about it offline, and we said it's so important for the supply chain to be sustainable. So we're looking after the planet, the people involved in it, and obviously our profit. But I think that for quite some time, we've kind of had this charge of greenwashing and the like. Yeah, we're dead green, but it's actually performative. It's saying it, but not doing it. So what's your thoughts about, where we are with the supply chain, and how important is sustainability becoming within organizations? It's very important to consumers. They want to know that they're spending their dollars wisely on the right things. But what's your view about the whole area of sustainability, and how this is embedded in some way into supply chain?
I almost wonder if most of us aren't at that embedding stage yet. It does still seem to be very performative, but we do have that demand from customers and from consumers at large. They want that transparency. They want to know where their goods are coming from, what that supply chain looks like. I think most of us still think of supply chain as linear, where we move through certain checkpoints to a finished product, and that finished product ends with the customer. From what I see and what I'm experiencing, that when we think of it as ending at the customer, that's not actually where the product life ends. So in order to really foster sustainability and move this forward and embed it, we need to start thinking of our supply chains and our products and our goods as what happens after the customer is finished with it. And that can seem like a lot because we haven't had to really think about it before, but I think there's a lot of opportunity there too. When you talk about circular supply chains, when you talk about returns, we see lots of large retailers and the big one, Amazon, being stuck with all of these products coming back and really no pragmatic way to deal with them. So you see people frantically trying to hire this return service out and just really not having a great mechanism for just what to do with these products. And also on the consumer side, they are interacting with municipal recycling. Cities are trying to deal with this influx of more stuff. So there's certainly room, one, to improve and create a better overall experience for the customer that isn't just, talking about it, but actually giving them the tools that they need to, what's the post life for this product, making it easier. And having a more holistic, instead of a linear chain, finding that circularity without ideally having everything end up in landfill, right? What can we start to reuse? What can we start to repair? But I'm curious to your thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, I think that when it goes right back to the actual design of the product itself, I think that at the moment we're probably still working with those cost models, economic models that you have to fit in here for it to meet the gross margin requirement, pricing requirement, and we have to question the motivation of companies wanting things to last longer. Guess what? I don't see the customer so many times. There is some pretty strong forces that say, let's make things with inbuilt obsolescence. But in some ways, I don't mind that if the product is designed for modularity. So we actually move our business not necessarily from selling just a product, but maybe lots of bits that can go into the product to swap out the things that are easily serviceable, put a new thing in. The consumer can manage that themselves. I don't need to phone up an expensive plumber or whatever it might be to come in and say, oh, it's going to be expensive. And often the reaction is, oh, how much? And they say a number is, oh, I'm about to get a new machine. Dump this one. Businesses in general have to start to really rethink this one down to the fine detail of design. And supply chains need to help the businesses get there in obviously an efficient way, but knowing where that stuff is coming from, because often we look at the product that's presented to us and we think the supply chain stop. If we look down the pipeline, the supply chain stops at the factory that made it. Well, hold the bus. They've got their own supply chain they're managing. Where do they get their raw materials from? What type of labor, and I use that word cautiously, what type of labor is involved in the production of either the produce or the raw materials, the extraction, whatever it is, before it even gets to the factory. So I think there's a huge rethinking of this whole process, because we've been driven by economics rather than a sustainability agenda. And I think that, we can keep pushing this, and we hope that businesses are starting to get more attuned to the fact that consumers want to know they're spending their dollars wisely with regenerative, sustainable products and services.
And like you say, not only on not just the recyclability of the product itself or the tangible piece of, oh, here's the product, but as you mentioned, that social justice, sustainability as well, the holistic approach, that it's not only about the product, it's about the people. This is a topic that you and we can go on for. It's a fascinating topic. Supply chain is such a hot news topic. A lot of people outside of the industry got to experience that Suez Canal blockage and issue, not just all of us sort of personally experiencing it. But companies don't often think of or sometimes include supply chain management or executives in the planning decisions. And, I know this is something that you have, a lot of insight on. And so what are some of the conversations or shifts that need to happen to create more of an alignment between sort of C-suite and the whole part of the company? And what would bridge that disconnect, right? Do we need to build our teams differently here?
Yeah, I think it starts with, it's one of those chicken or egg situations. Do we redesign the supply chain and then find somebody to lead it, or do we find a leader who can then redesign the supply chain? When we talk about the supply chain, just to sort of break it down, there's two components of it. There's let's call it the supply network, which is maybe the factories and the inbound transportation to the DC. At the DC, it gets stored and then it gets pushed out to stores or via the stores or some other method to people's porches or curbside, whatever it might be. That's a distribution network, but the whole thing's a supply chain, and it involves lots of different people and lots of support from the ecosystem. to actually think about retailers, and when I'm talking to different retailers, I say, well, tell me how you handle that. And we find that the supply chain is, firstly, it's highly siloed, very fragmented. What I would call as a supply chain may actually be in merchandising, maybe a bit of stores, wouldn't be necessarily a bit of marketing, but you never quite know. But you find parts of the actual overall horizontal flow tucked away. Yeah. And I think that's just a matter of history. And it needs a pretty strong leader to actually go to the head of merchandising, the head of stores, and say, look, these are logistical functions and they form part of a supply chain, and we need to manage these in a different way. So what I would say, and I've been saying for quite a few years now, is each business, and it's not isolated just to retail, but retail could really get on the front foot here by saying we will appoint a chief supply chain officer. It's a term that's still quite uncommon in Canada. It's not the EVP or the SVP, whatever. They may or may not be the real person that should be sitting at the C-suite, advising the board, advising their colleagues, challenging their colleagues on some of the great schemes they have for developing sales. But they need to have a chief supply chain officer who's managing that end-to-end horizontal process that brings the stuff in, looks after the manufacturer and the previous steps to that, and presents it to the consumer. Because if we don't have stock on the shelf, we don't make the sale. So everything else in the business, whereas for like the last 100 years, it's been stores and merchandise, and everything else is periphery. They have been the centre point since 1927, I'll add.
Before us.
Just for a little while. I think that what we've seen through the pandemic is a change in the dynamics of how retail businesses need to reform for the future. And it is going to be quite technology led, but most importantly, to recognize it's a supply chain that actually delivers value to the consumer. If a supply chain does not work, you do not make the sale. You do not have stuff on shelves. You do not get it to people's porches. And that alone should force business leaders to actually say, I know we've got like a VP of logistics or whatever it might be, however that's titled, head of supply chain. But that person's really in the weeds. And that person over a long period of time has just been told, this is what we want you to do, get on with it. We're looking for people to step into the chief supply chain officer role to actually understand retailing, to understand the arguments from stores, from merchandising, from marketing, from estates, facilities, whatever it might be, and to bring that together so that business can actually start to perform, create competitive advantage through being able to set strategies and execute those strategies through integrated and collaborative supply chain management.
Yes, collaboration is key, I think, moving forward. We've seen some of that through the pandemic, sort of that shift away from everyone's doing their own thing. They're very competitive because now, in order to access resources, in order to access containers, in order to move your goods at all, or to even find production facilities, I think there's been a breakdown of some of those competitive barriers to be able to focus on just sharing and getting things moving and keeping that forward. So collaboration is fascinating.
Yeah, but the scary thing is we actually experienced collaboration in our grocery industry.
Yeah.
Before the lockdown, it was like, you have to fit this cost model, and if you don't, and if you come in late, we're going to fine you and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And all of a sudden we went into the lockdown and our food manufacturers, CPGs, were struggling with the wide range of products they had to support. Our grocers actually stepped in. They helped each other out. They worked closely with the Nestle's, the Kraft Heinz, the Conagras of the world to work out how they could all work together to get stuff on their shelves to support their customers. Yeah. Within 2 months, it was back to normal.
Oh, right.
We had a glimmer.
We had the glimpse. We had that little.
But we know it's possible.
It is possible.
I know there's restrictive practice and all that lot, but we can collaborate. I think That's really important that we start from a point of goodwill, that we want to work with each other, that we want to win together, than I win, you lose all the time. That doesn't breed innovation. It doesn't breed any sense of creativity. It certainly kills off pretty quickly collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, you like that seems to be the cost, is that innovation cost. And I do think customers want to know that. They want to know that, we're not out for blood here. We're not so competitive. It's just that we're providing a good service, we're working together. And that harkens back to the sustainability conversation of being more holistic and more purposeful and thoughtful in our designs of this.
Yes, absolutely. So as we reflect on the last 18 months, bearing in mind I've talked about resiliency and agility, we've talked about sustainability, and we've kind of had a broad chat about things. Can we afford to keep doing what we were doing in 2019, but just like more of it? Or do we, what's your view about, it's time, we're 18 months in, and I have to put my hand up and say, guess what? My view is we're only halfway through this.
Yeah.
If we've got another 12 months, 18 months ahead of us, how long can we push our executives and our teams to continue at the pace that they've been working at with uncertainty? Do we think it's appropriate just to keep going, just do more of it, throw in more shifts, do more hours to try and get us through to the other side of this? If we were left with a prospect of another 18 months of this, would we start to think differently?
Such a good question. And I think a lot of us were quite optimistic. I certainly didn't expect that 2021 would be this complex, even just the logistics piece of moving the goods. And I don't think I'm alone in that. And I heard earlier in the spring, it was the kind of saying was, oh, well, a lot of us manufacture sort of overseas. It's like, oh, once we get to that Lunar New Year holiday in February 2022 or January 2022, it's like, it'll be a reset. And then as we started coming through the summer, it's like, I don't think that's what's going to happen. Anyone who's been in this industry for a while is quite certain that this could be another 18 months, another 2-3 years even. You get this sort of black swan event and this shock and this disruption. And yeah, for most of us, we were grateful to have our jobs, grateful to keep having the orders and keep moving through. And you just put your head down and kept working. That's served its purpose. But I think as we've been talking about agility and sustainability, I mean, it's really a time to, in this kind of chaos, in chaos breeds opportunity. Is that what the quote is? So it's time to really rethink and adjust and actually put in these practices of building resilience, being more agile, and really rethinking where we're working. Maybe is this a time for shoring and nearshoring and local? Is this a time for collaboration? And also, what role, if it hasn't been already, is digital and automation playing in our supply chains and in our businesses? Because I think a lot of us have been looking at it, thinking about it, maybe about to do it, and now might be the time.
Yeah, just looking at the sort of normal path of these ideas, let's introduce self-checkout. I mean, that's probably easier for us to conceive what that might look like. Initially, it is to perhaps redeploy the staff and have more sales floor staff, move them off the tills and get them to do upselling, all that kind of stuff. But as you get closer to the business case, or if you get over the business case, you get into the planning for the implementation, it very quickly becomes cost saving. It's almost inevitable. It becomes a cost saving. Either the provider says, oh, I have to put a business case together and it needs to be showed a certain ROI, or there'd be some pressure inside that says, oh, I can't go to the board with this on some sort of broad numbers. I want to know how many people I'm going to take out. And similarly, when we take that to the warehouse with great automation projects, people are setting up $400 million worth of automation in a grocery warehouses. And I think the wallows are about 100 million, assuming that they don't overspend each. At some point, it becomes all about the ROI on that, not necessarily the business benefits in a wider sense that allows them to become more agile or more resilient, or to offer a slightly different customer segment. And these business cases aren't always well written. And because of that, they become very quickly like cost as is, costs going forward, investment, what's the difference? Oh, let's do it or not do it. It becomes a very much more simplistic analysis. But I think that there are great opportunities for automation to take, especially in what we've been through, where when we first went into the first lockdown, we didn't know what this virus was going to do, how it's going to transmit, if we touch something, have we got it, and all these kind of things. So anything that encourages a certain degree of contactless activity, like, you tapping chip, whatever it's called, the thing you do on your credit card, but within an industrial environment like a warehouse, getting boxes moved around by a machine and presented to you, all you have to do is like take it out the bucket and put it into a box over here. Besides the labor impact in terms of making the job a lot easier for people, it was also, the virus might not transmit onto you at last, rather than, if you're working in a conventional warehouse and doing manual selection where you're bumping into colleagues. I think the path of automation has to be, when we're putting together the business case, we really need to have a much wider perspective on these things, so we can actually gather all the business benefits and all the opportunities that automation will provide us in the future, much in the same way as it may provide us with a step in agility.
And there is a bit of a leap too. We want the business case, but we'll never really be able to factor in some of the intangibles. And there are already companies who are moving forward with some of these technologies. And at this point, at the pace the new technology is available, that the robotics is coming in, at what point are retailers or some of our peers going to be left behind in a way? Because there is a lot of uncertainty. But when you see companies who've kind of made that leap, from say 2 years ago, and what their potential is 5 years from this point, you have to have that trust or faith that intangible value will be realized. And it's not always as simple as, I can put a number, it's black and white down on paper. And, we really, in some ways, you have to have that visionary leadership to follow through.
Yeah, I agree. But often now, as I mentioned, business cases can be very simplistically developed, and we need much better CFOs.
A little more imaginative.
Yeah, creative. not creative accounting, but just creative. How they assign values to these less than tangible concepts.
Yes.
We have to be very expansive in our questions we ask ourselves and the challenges of ourselves, because the supply chain is going to be the area where we either win in the digital age or we fall behind, and there's a consequence for falling behind.
Yes, definitely. A last thought I might, and something we talked about, is our motivation is to build these supply chains for consistency. As humans, I think we crave routine and crave being able to have familiarity and put things into, like, okay, we're moving things in boxes, let's put this process in a box and it'll be straightforward from A to B. And this is the time or an opportunity to really be adventurous, to really embrace that it is going to be inconsistent, it might be almost chaotic, and to see that as potential for, as you said, to be more expansive and to really create this value chain that is sustainable and is really built for the future.
Yeah, going back to a point I made earlier on about a chief supply chain officer, we are not looking for somebody who's done this same job for 25 years. They know exactly what to do. We're talking about someone who is visionary, who has transformational skills. And if that means, as you transition from your VP of logistics or head of supply chain, whatever it is, and you've got this actual gap in the organization, you know where you want to get to, but unfortunately, these people are really good at what they do, but they can't stand up. You may want to look at a short-term resource to help to work out what that spec of that job needs to be and to perhaps initiate some of these changes. But we must get to the point you've just made, Audrey. We must have experimentation. Experimentation allows us to get a glimpse into the future and maybe some ideas about that process that we've been doing for like 20 years. We tried this and it really worked. It's, it gave us super service or took some costs out, or it was just so much easier to work maybe across silos in the short term while they still exist, and puts us in a very different position, gave us a very different perspective on what's possible. And I think that the transformational leadership style is one that looks at what's possible, not what we've done and is trusted. And to your point about consistency, I think we mix up being efficient with actually being good.
Yes, exactly. And I think there's a lot of fear around it too, of course. And we're not talking about, you go in tomorrow and turn a switch and like, we've all automated now. We've all done this. We're transformational in that it's, a complete whirlwind. There are ways to do this, incrementally on a smaller scale to build in. And just like you said, be experimental, just try it. That's something that I think both of us are so excited about, that it's such a dynamic and so many possibilities, right?
Yeah. So as we round this up, we just can't fail to notice that we've got another supply chains discussion on at 2:00 between John Thorbeck and a great retailing legend, Doug Stevens, a futurist. I'm going to absolutely stay tuned for that. And I hope that if you're still here and you've got some value from this conversation, that you're well primed for that conversation.
Very exciting. Thank you so much, Gary, for the conversation today. I know you and I could just chat for hours. It's obviously something that we're very passionate about. So I don't know if you want to leave the audience with where to find you. For people to find me, I'm over on LinkedIn. As I said, I'm in-house at Orchard Custom Beauty. I also drop some live tidbits over on Twitter on what I'm doing with my day. So if that interests people, like complaining about container prices and some of my real life experience in the value chain. And where can we find you, Gary?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm quite visible there. I'm on 2 podcast channels, The Business of Retail and The Retail Code. One's with people that are pretty well known in the retail industry, David Ian Gray, George Menakakis, Christine Cowan, and Craig Patterson, who runs Retail Insider, which I often write commentary for. And also on the Retail Code with Lisa Amlami. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, please do that. But also write in that, we saw your session at the RCC store event, just so I know where you're coming from, because I do got quite a few invitations. I go, I don't understand. You don't say this. Ignore. And if you need to write to me directly, it's gary.newbury@supplychainspecialist.com, and my website is RetailAID.ca. And you'll find out, I've got loads of information on there, which might be helpful.
Yeah, lots of resources from you for sure.
I'd like to thank you as well, Audrey. It's been a great conversation. We had a few offline, and really it's been the easiest chat in the world to actually talk to you about the supply chain. We're both, as you said earlier, very passionate about it.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone who's attended so far, and we look forward to your feedback.
Sounds good. Thank you for listening today. I hope the information has been valuable for you and your team. You can connect with me via the website retail.ca and go to the contact page, or via LinkedIn by typing linkedin.com/in/last-mile. Look forward to hearing from you and playing an active part with your supply chain and your business's transformation as you start to act boldly, think big, scale, adapt, and win.